Well, first of all, hello everybody. Thanks for showing up to that Zen webinar here. I feel a little stupid talking to an empty room of people with absolutely no feedback whether you actually can hear me or see me, but Neely tells me that everything works out. We had a little trouble with the phone connection. I hope that audio is alright for you. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about the 7 steps to better PHP code, which is a talk about refactoring in essence, and it's a 2-piece talk. We'll start off with the first steps today, and in the second part, coming up in 2 weeks, we'll finish off with the rest of the steps. Okay, first of all, who I am. Probably most of you do not know me, at least do not know me personally. I do PHP since the year 2000. I started with 4.0 beta 3, I think, and have been an addict ever since. I'm an IT consultant specializing in PHP topics. I'm based in Munich, Germany, actually a little to the south, close about halfway between Munich and the Alps, which is very nice scenery. William, your question, basically any version of PHP. PHP in general, please post your questions in the Q&A panel. That's something I was about to say in a minute. The first question popping up there, yes, it's going to be recorded and it's going to be available offline. I hope this does not make you tune out now. Okay, so I hold a degree in computer science from Technical University in Munich. I do write a lot. I'm writing about a lot of PHP articles, basically anything that has PHP in the name. I've written for German PHP Magazine, International PHP Magazine, PHP Architect, PHP Journal, you name it, PHP Solutions. I wrote for them. Currently, maybe you have seen a series of Xdebug articles by me on DevZone, which is a nice series of articles I encourage you to check out. And I will have an English book, my first English book, by the way, coming up this year, published with PHP Architect, and this is going to be about PHP migration. I do speak at PHP conferences, so if you are in Montreal or in Chicago this year at the PHP conferences, you can catch up with me there. All right, I have a blog inside.innovative.de, which is my company, and you can also drop me an email anytime if you like. So let's get rolling. We're going to be talking about refactoring, and I have developed this special sort of methodology for refactoring PHP code. First of all, what is refactoring? In essence, refactoring is about changing code. You want to change the code to improve the readability, and you want to simplify the structure. You're not supposed to change the results, however. So refactoring is just there to make the code better. Refactoring is not adding any new features to the code. This is completely different. You can refactor before you add new features. You can refactor after you have added new features, but you're not supposed to mix up the two things. Either you are refactoring or you're programming. Always keep that in mind. Basically, refactoring can be referred to cleaning up a code, if you want. Okay. Refactoring is an important part of Agile methods, extreme programming, all those Agile methodologies that everybody keeps talking about all the time. Refactoring is an important part of those because, well, you see in a minute all the benefits that refactoring has, and all this Agile development will just not work without refactoring. But you don't have to be Agile. You don't have to do extreme programming. You can benefit from refactoring regardless of what methodology you use. Okay, and one very important thing, we had the PHP 4 question coming up already. It's not only usable for object-oriented code. Refactoring works especially well on object-oriented code, but you can also refactor procedural code. In fact, you can even refactor procedural code and introduce OOP by refactoring. which is a nice thing. It's an interesting experience. If you haven't tried it, you really should try it out once, and it's fun to do. Okay, some resources. There is one definitive book on refactoring written by Mr. Martin Fowler. It's called Refactoring, Improving the Design of Existing Code. I would really recommend everybody who's interested in refactoring to read that book. All the examples, virtually all the examples are in Java code. Some are in C#, and I think, yeah, that's about it. But it's still, it's okay. If you know PHP, if you know some OOP, you can read it. I would not recommend the book as a basic introduction to refactoring for anybody who's not too comfortable with OOP. But basically, this is what these two talks we're doing here are about, to introduce you to refactoring, even if you're not an OOP guru. There is a site, www.refactoring.com, which is maintained by Martin Fowler. Also, some resources and interesting stuff there. There is a wiki. I have put the URL that provides the introduction to refactoring there. You might want to check that out. And last but not least, this is a very nice site, which basically shows you what you should not do. It's how to write unmaintainable code, and obviously is not the intention of the site to teach you how to write unmaintainable code, but to show you what you should avoid. Okay, why the hell should we refactor at all? Well, the world constantly changes. Yesterday was raining, today it was sunny, now it's dark, by the way. It's a little past 6 p.m. here, so whenever you have to go to work after this presentation is finished, I can go off and have a beer. Okay, so the environment changes. I'm not talking about the earth warming this time. I'm talking about the technical environment. Obviously, yesterday we used PHP 4. Today we should be using PHP 5. Tomorrow, hopefully, we will be using PHP 6. But maybe this is going to be until the day after tomorrow, until PHP is sorry. Yeah, you have. No, you don't have to take notes now. There is a question about the URLs and links. The presentation material will be made available, and I have a URL for that coming up on the last slide, and you will be able to find everything at the Zen site tomorrow. Okay, terminology changes. We're talking about certain things when we start off a project, and during the project we quite often realize that the name is not right anymore, and the name has changed, or we realize that the customer uses different names than the developers do, than product management do. So this is also a reason why you should refactor code to make the code actually reflect the terminology that you're actually using. And then requirements change. This is one of the most important aspects. Once you have more or less successfully completed the project and deliver a piece of software, you usually find out that it's not the piece of software the customer actually wanted, because well, maybe within the year that you spent in creating the software, the requirements has changed, the customer's business has changed, so you'll have to adapt the software to the change. And this is one of the main things where refactoring comes into play. You cannot just start creating new software from scratch all the times. You'll have to work with existing software. You have to keep existing software alive. This is why you should refactor. As you keep existing software alive, its design sort of decays. This is unfortunately very true. It's basically true for anything. If you build a house and then you build a garage next to it, and then you build maybe a patio, and then you start adding more and more features, the original design decays. It's the same with software. If you apply fixes to software, if you extend software, the original design, regardless how brilliant it was, will decay over time. It will sort of blur or vanish. And that's why you should use refactoring to sort of balance these changes in software and make sure that the software design is improved by refactoring, sort of to counterbalance the decay. And then there is that one reason we never get it right the first time. At least I don't. You're probably more clever than I am, so you'll be able to get it right the first time. You'll never have to use refactoring. I never get it right. I always have to use refactoring. And it's better to work with existing code than to start from scratch. Okay, when should you refactor? Basically, anytime. I'll give you a couple of examples. Before you add new functionality, because you look at the code and you realize I have to add a new feature and I have no idea how I'm supposed to do that. Now start refactoring, sort of clean up the code until it suddenly becomes obvious how you're supposed to add the feature. You may not believe me, but trust me, this really works. If you're not sure how to add a new feature to your software, then refactor the software using those steps I'll start to present you in a minute, and you will at a certain point suddenly see obviously, oh, that's how I can add the feature, there it is. And I couldn't have done that before without refactoring. When you don't understand the code, well, you probably have heard about the collective code ownership thing. Nobody owns the code. Everybody in the project owns the code, which means everybody is allowed to change the code. And if you see code that's not good, that you don't understand, you'll just change it by refactoring because it belongs to everybody. That's like open source, and it's really a good thing. This helps you make the code more readable. You should also refactor when you fix a bug. Basically, it's the same like adding new functionality. If you have no idea where the bug actually stems from, you might be successful if you refactor the code and suddenly the bug is more exposed and it's easier to fix. If you've already found the bug and you're not sure how to fix it, then you can treat that like adding new functionality, refactor until it becomes obvious how to add the feature. Trust me, it really works. You have to try it out for yourself, but it actually works, and it works very well. And then there is one thing after a code review. Usually this is the point where I ask everybody in the audience whether they've done a code review already or how often they do code reviews. Feel free to post that in the chat if you like, or in the Q&A. Code reviews are a very, very good thing. Just look at the code that you have written, look at the code that you have written together with a colleague, look at a colleague's code together with somebody else, and you'll just notice, you know, this is maybe you could do that differently, maybe this is not the best idea, maybe in certain conditions there is a bug in the software, and then use refactoring techniques to fix your findings. Okay, some benefits in case you have to sell refactoring to your boss. Because bosses usually tend to say, why should you spend time on refactoring? I don't get new features from that. Well, refactoring improves the software design, as we have said before. And a better software design means it's easier to maintain. You'll have less bugs. You'll spend less time debugging because the software is easier to understand. This, in turn, will speed up development, and it's easier to add new features. You can use refactoring to prepare adding of new features. This will make you a lot quicker. And then it leads to more code reuse, as one point in refactoring, as you'll see later, will be removing duplicate code, for example, making code better so that it's easier to reuse it directly leads to more code reuse. Okay, now we need to get into the refactoring thing. How do you actually refactor? Well, first of all, and this is a bit of theory here, you run tests to make sure that things work, because you want to make sure that you actually start off with working code, except we are talking about a bug, which is a little different. Then you refactor. You refactor one step at a time. This is more important than it actually sounds. Don't make large steps. Work in small steps. You are probably using source code revision control software, which is very important. Refactor, do a small change to the software, then check it back into your repository and do the next step. If you screw it up and you have done a small step, it's much easier to just roll back to the latest known good release, which is maybe just a couple minutes ago. Then spending like 5 hours trying to add a new feature, completely screwing up the code and having no fallback. And trust me, this has happened to me before. I know what I'm talking about. It took me like 2 or 3 days to get the code to a stable state again where it would actually run. So don't do that. Work in little steps, one step at a time, and don't make the steps too big. Well, after you have refactored, you want to rerun the tests to make sure that things still work. This, again, is a bit of theory, because you don't always have these tests. We'll get to that in a minute. Well, something that's currently happening is that refactoring support starts showing up in PHP IDEs. I think Zend Neon has some features there. This was the Zend plug. I'm forced, no, just a joke. It's showing up in Zend Neon, and it sort of helps you to do refactoring by applying so-called refactoring patterns to your code. This has been in existence for Java-based IDEs for quite some time, and it starts showing up in PHP now. Personally, I'm rather biased. I think automation does not replace thinking, and PHP is a very dynamic language. If you just think about renaming a variable, you can use dynamic variable names in PHP using $2 or you can create sorry, there's another question popping up there. The question is which PHP IDEs I'm using. Currently I'm using Notepad++, and I'm in the process of converting to Eclipse PDT, which I like very much. And Eclipse PDT, I think, is the same basis as Zend Neon, which seems to be a cool thing. There's another question. Unit tests are okay. Yeah, let me answer that in a minute when you get to the tests on the next slide there. Okay, so I think that automated refactoring is not really a solution, and it doesn't really make anything better. It's just more likely to sort of screw up the code, because if you think of, you can create a class in PHP, you rename classes, you can do that by grep, or you can have your IDE do that. But as soon as you use the class, as you build up a class name in a variable, for example, and then run $, whatever, this is probably not being caught by the automated refactoring thingy. So that's why I don't think this is really helpful today. It might become a very interesting feature in the future. Okay, testing. Always that wily testing. Testing is there to prove that software works to specification. This basically is what you call a system test or an acceptance test. You want to make sure that the software does what the customer has paid for. The customer needs certain features, and we write tests to prove that software does that stuff. This is basically testing a whole application. I would suggest looking at Selenium, which is a very interesting tool to test whole applications. Basically, Selenium is browser-based. It runs tests in the browser and allows you to automate them, and it works across browsers. It's a very interesting piece of software. Pretty much very ugly hack in JavaScript to get that going, and it's not in a perfect release state currently, but it's usable. The other thing is to ensure, by testing, to ensure that code still works after a change, and this is more the unit test approach. I would say a unit test. Well, I can't ask you how many of you are familiar with unit tests, so I'll give a brief explanation there. A unit test is a test that runs on a class or a piece of software. The idea of testing, test frequently. When you're refactoring, that was Selenium. I have a question popping up there, the application. I'll put that up as in one of the notes. So when you download the slides tomorrow, you'll have some Selenium and the URL along with the material. Okay, yeah, we have a comment here. Unit tests allow you to verify each function of your class, right? That's basically the idea. Test a class or a piece of code that, yeah, there's the URL of Selenium. Thanks for posting that. So there you are. Okay, the idea of testing frequently is especially important with refactoring. And the idea is to use self-testing, automated tests. You don't want to look at a result manually and decide whether that's correct or not, because you have to repeat that all the time. You want to automate that. And basically, an automated test is nothing but to calculate something and to compare that with a pre-calculated result. This is the essence of an automated test. And there is a sort of standard for automated tests, which is XUnit, that originates from the Java world, from the Smalltalk world, actually. And there are two products. We have PHP Unit by Sebastian Bergmann, who's probably very well known in the PHP community, and he's speaking at every PHP conference, I think. And there is Simple Test by Marcus Baker, who's a British guy. Simple Test used to be the only one supporting mock objects. PHP Unit does support mock objects now. Simple Test is PHP 4 compatible, so if you're still on PHP 4, you might want to look at Simple Test, but my recommendation would be to go with PHP Unit. This is what all the larger projects use, so you're certainly on the right track in using that. And PHP Unit also integrates with Selenium, by the way. Again, with testing, it's not only for object-oriented code. You can test procedural code as well. Don't be scared by this OOP stuff. You can use it for procedural code as well. Basically, it's just a framework that allows you to compare a pre-calculated result to something that your code has actually calculated. So usually you don't have tests. I mean, most of the people don't for existing applications. If you don't have them, create them as you go. If you have very, very procedural code with not much separation of concerns, like you have an HTML page with SQL statements, business logic, and everything in there, it's rather difficult to create isolated tests. So maybe you want to refactor first and then start creating tests. But it's a good idea to create the tests as you go, especially when bugs turn up. First thing you should do, create a test that exposes the bug, then fix the bug. You have to test pass then, and whenever you reintroduce the bug, you have the test failing again, and you know, the bug is back. Okay, at least what you should do is running a lint check. You can do that at the command line by running php -l and giving a file name. And what this is going to do is it's going to run a syntax check on your file. It will not execute the file. It's just going to do a syntax check, which means it's going to tell you, no, this code is no good. There is a syntax error in it. And it's better to find that out right there at the command line than to ship your application to 1 million customers and realize that in the 7th submenu, when they click the 3rd item, the application is going to crash because of a syntax error. Okay, let's get into the details of the 7 steps. Number 1, format your source code. I'd format source code consistently. Consistently wouldn't fit into the headline there because I left it out then. Code is read more often than written. Usually you write it once and then you look over it 5 times trying to find the bug. So you have a read to write ratio 5:1. You should spend some time in making sure that the code is readable. And the code should be human readable. It's rather easy to write code that computers can understand. It's way more difficult to write code that humans can understand. And well, it's sort of, if you should always write the codes in a way that somebody as stupid as me can understand it. And I'm rather stupid. When I look at code, I need to be able to understand what the code does in 30 seconds, quick looking at it, a piece of code, and if I can understand in like 30 seconds what the code does, it's probably too complicated, for me at least. So this is a piece of rather unreadable code. This is C, and this is one of the reasons why I don't like C and I don't do C, because when you have 3 developers looking at one piece of C code and ask them what it does, you usually get 3 different explanations. Well, with PHP, it's of course much better, but we still have a lot of opportunities to write bad code. Let me show you some examples. This, for example, aside from the fact that there could be more white space, I have no idea about the operator precedence. I mean, you know, as I say, I'm rather lazy guy and a little stupid guy, so I don't memorize the operator precedence. I would rather want to make that clear by adding more braces there. And looking at that, you usually have no idea what it actually does. You'd have to, yeah, you try it out, you have to break it down. Another example is that indentation thing. If you look at this piece of code, this is really ugly. And I made that up on purpose, of course. If you look at the alignment of these braces, you'll probably think that this brace matches that one, which is just not true because there's another one here. So when you look at that code, you have absolutely no clue what fits together and what belongs together, which is a bad thing. Avoid that. Of course, this is a very extreme example. I suggest you format your source code consistently, and you should establish a coding standard. Coding standard is more than just formatting the source code, but it's also about which coding constructs to use or not to use. We'll focus on the formatting part here. Number one, this is, as you've seen in the previous example, how to indent, as where to put white space, and also capitalization is a quite important aspect because PHP has a little awkward way of treating capitalization. In some respects, it's I know there's another question coming up. Yes, this is the answer. The question was, isn't it easier to use IDE tools? Right, there are a user code beautifier, and I'm going to show you an example on the next slide. So don't come up with a coding standard from scratch. We use existing ones. Just Google the internet. Pear has a coding standard. I think Zend Framework has a coding standard that's published. Just go with it, use it, and do whatever works for you, but do it consistently. And do it consistently throughout the whole project. All the developers working on one project have to agree on one coding standard and one way of formatting the source code. This makes life much easier. There is a peer tool called PHP Beautifier, which automatically formats PHP source code. You can also do it by the IDE if you want, but there's a peer package which allows you to customize the way you want the code formatted if you want. I have a URL up there. Installation, as for all peer packages, is very easy. And the usage is also very easy because it has a command line interface. Basically, you just call PHP Beautifier with the file name of an ugly and the file name of a pretty file, and then it's going to format the file for you. It has a default formatting style which pretty much fits the peer coding standards. You can use different coding standards. You can even create your own, as I mentioned before. Let's look at a quick example how PHP Beautifier would work. This is ugly. We have white space here and no white space here. It's not aligned, and this is not aligned, obviously. And you see there again, we have the matching braces that are no matching braces. This looks like an error because there should be a brace somewhere down here, but it isn't because we have one back there. I just have the chat window above that. So, okay. As I'm personally using PHP Beautifier. Sorry, the question is if I personally use PHP Beautifier. Well, it's automated, and I like automation is a good thing. I think there's no point in sitting down and formatting source code manually. The cons is you really have to write your own coding, your own style, because the beautifier removes blank lines, for example. And so I like to work with blank lines in my code, so that's why I don't use the beautifier. But I'm very strict in coding, in the code I write. So usually I don't make mistakes. It makes more sense to use the beautifier sort of as a starting point. If you have a project that has no consistent formatting, use the beautifier front to have a nice format, and then continue on manually. And there's another tool I'm going to show you in a minute that allows you to analyze the code and see whether that matches whether it violates any rules of your guidelines. So what would PHP Beautifier make out of this code? This, which is quite nice. It's aligned and the braces are matching, and this is the pair style with the opening brace on the same line. Personally, I like it down here, so I have it matching, but this is personal preference. Whatever you want, whatever works for you, you can use. Okay, I mentioned that tool a minute ago. PHP Code Sniffer is another peer package. This detects coding style violations. It doesn't change anything in the code. And by the way, if you use the beautifier, make sure to have a backup. And after you've run the beautifier, just make sure that the code still is okay by running a lint test. It's not 100% proof that everything will work, but it's better than nothing. Installation of the Code Sniffer, also very easy, just pair install command, and also the Code Sniffer has a command line interface, and it works on directories. Analyzing any file in that directory is also customizable. You can create your own sniffs, that's what they are called. It also has a default for the pair coding style and for very strict coding styles. So let's have a look at what PHP Code Sniffer output looks like. The idea of PHP Code Sniffer is to tell the developer there's something wrong in your code on that line, go fix it. It's not an automated tool that fixes stuff, but it tells the developer what's wrong, and the developer is supposed to fix it by himself, which sort of has the learning effect. So as you can see here, I'll have to rearrange some windows for the chat windows, excuse me. This is going to complain about Windows style line endings in a Unix file. This will require you certain comments. We'll get to that in a minute. This is the wrong brace style. There's the opening brace on the next line, and the Code Sniffer doesn't want it that way. And that coding style, you can choose another coding style. You can program your own. You can basically program the Code Sniffer to enforce your personal coding guidelines. Okay, there's a limit on the line length, for example. The equal signs is not aligned. There is a space in the wrong place and stuff like that. This is very nice. Instead of going through the code manually and looking for errors, just run that tool and it's going to tell you what you're supposed to fix in the code. Yeah, there is a comment saying is this like indent code in Zend IDE? Yes, basically, but the beautifier does not only do indentation, but it also can put blanks in your code, can add and remove empty lines depending on what style of code you'll create. Okay, any questions to step number 1? Okay, I'll just type them in as they come up and I'll continue in the meantime. Naming conventions, very, very, very important thing. Establish a naming scheme. Stick to it. Naming scheme means agree on a way of capitalization, use consistent names, and make the purpose clear. If you don't know what name you should give something, there is a good chance that you actually don't know what you're doing. If you want to write a method or a function and you don't know how to name it, the chances are good that you don't have a clear vision of what it's supposed to do. So maybe take a step back and think about the name. And if you have the name for it, then usually it's much easier to actually know what code you should put in there. One important thing that's often overlooked, keep file names simple. I would recommend sticking to alphanumeric characters, blanks, and underscores. Those are basically guaranteed to work on any operating system. If you're on Unix or Linux, you can use a backslash in a file name, for example. If you copy that file to Windows, you are in trouble. And if you know that Windows and Linux use different directory separators, but you can use the / throughout in PHP. You can also use any Unicode character for file names in any current operating system, but as soon as you transfer those files to an old operating system, you probably are in trouble. So I would recommend being very conservative with the file names, which I think is also an important part of a naming convention. The most important thing is prefix names in global namespace. It's too often it's not done. We will have namespaces in PHP 5.3, but until then, prefix your names. So we have a question. Yeah, we'll talk about the prefixes in variable names in a minute. Let's continue to the next slide. Let me show you some bad names. Process data. I mean, a computer does that all day. It doesn't communicate anything. Do it is even worse. I mean, yeah, what? In a loop, if you look at the code and there's a while or a for statement, you can pretty easily tell that it's a loop, but you have no idea what it's doing. It would be better to choose a name that says that explains what it's doing. Now pause. What is that? Is that delete position? Is that delta? Is that the HTML tag for strike through? Is that position, point of sale, the product of sums, whatever? Choose a speaking name and don't be scared in choosing longer names. It doesn't really impact performance that badly. Check connection versus is connected. I would prefer to name a function or method is connected because that implies that it's going to return yes or no, meaning true or false. A method check connection doesn't really communicate what it's going to return. File name and file name, one with a capital N. These are two different variables in PHP. PHP is not case sensitive with class names. I always have to look that up because I can never memorize it. It's not case sensitive with function names, so no matter if you write them in capital letters or not, it's going to refer to the same function, but variable names are case sensitive. That means these two are different variables. Now, if your project hasn't agreed on a naming convention clearly stating how the capitalization of names should be, then you're likely to use the wrong thing. We have a question, what about file underscore name and file dash name in PHP files? I'm not sure if the dash actually is allowed. I wouldn't use that. File underscore name is the one I would use for a local variable. We'll get to that in a second. PHP, there's another question. Will PHP finally have a standardized naming convention for function signature? No, I don't think so. I'm not sure what you mean by naming convention. There has been discussion about type hints recently on the list, and it's not clear where PHP will be heading there. We have the type hints for array and for objects. For the other types, it's still being vividly discussed. Basically, I think PHP's approach has always been to give you as much freedom as possible, which on the other hand allows you to do stupid things, unfortunately. Now, this open connection is a great name, but I have no clue what connection is opened. And then I have 4 parameters, A, B, C, D, and I have no idea what they are supposed to mean, which is obviously not a good naming. And this is a very important example. FTP connect, server port, whatever. FTP connect is a native PHP function brought in by the FTP extension. If you have that enabled, PHP will complain with a fatal error if you try to define a function to FTP connect. If you don't have the FTP extension, there's no problem. So this is another reason why you should prefix the names in global namespace. Never do FTP_connect, but always put your personal name, company name, or project prefix in front of that, just to make sure that it doesn't conflict with any PHP functions. And remember, PHP functions that are available depend on which extensions are loaded. And on the target system of your customer, this can be other extensions than on your system. Okay, so I'll quickly go across suggestions that I would make as how to name stuff. This is just the way I do it. You can use that. You can use it, adapt it as you want. Whatever you do, just do it for a reason and do it consistently. Constants I name in capital letters throughout with a prefix, and I use the my prefix here just to illustrate that. It's very important to know that constants in PHP are case insensitive. That means if you write it in capital letters and if you write it in small letters, it's a different constant. You can define a constant at runtime to be case sensitive by adding a true parameter here, which is very confusing. So keep in mind that it's best always to write the constants in capital letters, so you reduce the likeliness of screwing things up by just referring to a wrong constant there. Global variables, I won't go into the don't use global variables topic now. A lot of projects still have them. So what I would do is I would use camel case. Camel case means no spaces or underscores between the words and start every word with a capital letter. And with a prefix, always, because it's in global namespace, and the first letter is uppercase, but this is the first letter of the true name, not of the prefix. Functions. Lowercase underscore separated with a prefix. There's the prefix because the function is in global namespace again, and I like to name the parameters with the prefix a or prefix the. So in the function body, I always know when I'm referring to a parameter because it always has the a or the. Sometimes it's not nice wording if you have a and then a plural, for example, but it's just well, I think it's worth bearing with that not nice names there. Okay, class names, camel case, always with prefix because it's in global space, and then a capital first letter of the real name. Class constants, you can use constants in a class, which is a very good idea because it takes the constants out of the global namespace and puts it in the namespace of the class if you want. So you don't need a prefix here, and you can refer to this constant by writing my foo colon, is that double colon, double colon? I can never say that in English, I'm sorry. But you know what I mean, and then constant. This is a great thing. I would actually recommend sticking all the constants that you ever use into one class just to have them out of the global namespace and out of the potential conflict area there. Members are the functions of a class if you want. Members are the variables in a class. I'm starting to get confused myself now. Name them with a lowercase first letter and in camel case. And this is a very nice thing. Non-public members, so private and protected members, use an underscore. So whenever you refer to something with an underscore from within your class, you know this is going to be non-public. Whenever you try to refer to something with an underscore from outside the class, you'll probably know that it's not going to work. Sorry, I just skipped the slide there. So next, naming conventions for the methods. Now we are the functions inside the class, also camel case, lowercase first letter, and the same thing for non-public methods prefixed by an underscore. Okay, so last but not least, we have the local variables. That's the variables you have inside functions, inside methods, and I would recommend using all lowercase and separate the words by underscore. Now, if you stick to that naming convention, and you don't have to use exactly that. You don't have to use it exactly the way I propose just because I propose it. You can do it however you like, but the advantage of a clear naming convention is that with any variable, function, class name, you can immediately tell what it is. So whenever you have a name popping up in your source code, you can tell what it is just by looking at the way how it's written. Yeah, that's a question. Can I recall all your naming rules without these slides? Yeah, just use them for half a year and you will. But there's also a smiley there. Okay. So that takes us to step number 3. Sorry, I have some good name examples here. Well, that's the usual thing. The member, the accessor methods get and set. A function is active, which probably will return true or false, and I can tell that by the name. Well, set, obviously, I will change something. Get, obviously, I will to get something in return. Why we use underscore here is the question that refers to the local variables. That's just to distinguish the local variables from the members. Usually you have this or whatever in front of the members, but whenever you have a name with lowercase and underscores, you know if that's a local variable, it's not going to be valid outside the scope of a function or method. We have has bar, which obviously will also return true or false. Import bar, well, I have no idea what this is going to return or create a report. I like those method names with a verb and a noun. And if you would use like only import or create, you don't exactly know what it's going to do. And also you're at the risk of having a name conflict because import, I think in some PHP versions I think they change it to use now, but it used to be a reserved word which would actually prevent your code from compiling. Okay, what about a space and parameter functions? So the question is, are you supposed to write like trim opening brace blank $foo blank closing brace, or are you supposed to leave them out? Whatever you like. I personally don't write them. I write them after the comma, and I write them in front of after the operator. So I would write something like foo blank equals blank whatever. But that's just personal preference. I think it's common to not put a blank between the method name or the function name and the brace, whether you use user-defined functions or you call PHP built-in functions. I would recommend doing that. Whether you are using more or less white space, this is completely up to you. I would just recommend doing it consistently. Okay, number 3, the last step that we'll cover in this week's presentation. I hope you'll all check back in 2 weeks when we really start actually working and changing code. API documentation. The idea is to document public interfaces. I mean, this comes from the OO context where you have a public interface and then you have stuff the class does which you don't want to be visible to the outside. And basically the idea is just do the work and I don't care how you do it. This is a public interface. I'll just command you to do something and I don't care how you do it. I would recommend coding assumptions instead of commenting. Sometimes you'll find a comment, this must be an integer or something like that in the code. If that is the case, write is int and throw an exception or an error if it's not an int. Any validation is there for a reason. If variables do not validate, then there is a problem and you'll have to fix it. There's no point in trying to work with values that you know they're wrong. But don't just write comments asking politely to please pass an integer. Just check for it. Code the assumptions, then you don't have to write the comment. You'll just have the type check there in code. Are inline comments necessary? This is, well, usually you're told you should document your code, and this is very true. There's a question popping up, an example on assumptions. Assumption would be, I expect the first parameter passed to my function to be an integer or a string or an object of a certain type. An object is the best example because I want an object car because I want to call the method drive. And if you pass in a cow instead of a car, obviously I can't ask the cow to drive. I mean, I can ask the cow to do different things that a car can't do, but you'll want to know which way to go. Okay, I personally do not like inline comments because I think the code itself should communicate its purpose. And the better the names are, the fewer comments you need in your code anyway. Every time you write inline comments, there's a good chance that the code itself does not communicate the purpose and the concerns are not clearly separated. These are the things we're going to be talking in the next part of this presentation. There is a standard for API documentation derived from the so-called Java doc standard, which is called PHP doc. And the tool to work with is PHP Documenter. The idea is to create API documentation directly from the source code. If you write documentation, it's never in sync with the source code. So the only idea to have documentation in sync with source code is to generate that documentation from the source code. And this is what PHP Documenter does for you. It's a peer package, and installation is very easy. It's just a peer install command as always. We have a question popping up here. Is there a PHP doc plugin for Eclipse? I must admit I don't know. You can always integrate them by just doing a command line call, and I think it has been demonstrated at IPC a couple of weeks ago. I can try to put a link in the material, and I have another comment there. Yes, it is. So probably there is a PHP doc plugin. You can also use Doxygen if you want. It basically does the same thing, but PHP Documenter is the thing written in PHP. Usage is very easy. Also, there is a command line interface. You'll just create the documentation for a certain directory, and this is the target directory where you want the documentation to end up. Now, how does the whole thing work? You probably all have seen those doc blocks. These are special comment blocks, and this is how they look. They start like a normal multi-line comment, but with another asterisk sign here. And then there are special tags like author, version, parameter, returns, version. Version I have in there. You can create cross-references, a bunch of tags that you can use. And the idea is that you create a comment block in front of every class, function, and method that you write. I'll show you an example. This is a doc block for a class. I can assign a package. There is no equivalent for the package in PHP code. In the Java origin it is. But this is just to organize a bunch of classes into sort of subparts of your application. You can put the author there, the version, whatever. You can put the license there. You can put a link to a website there. You can put your email address in there. There are various tags to do that. And then that's the most important part of the documentation, actually, is to put in, to document the function, you'll document every parameter. So here we have, first parameter is key, and key can be anything, basically. It's mixed type. Second parameter is an array. Again, here, the name suggests what we are expecting, but just the name is not enough. You'll have to write a type in here, or you should write a check that actually there is an array being passed in. And then you'll also document the return type. This is something that that's not reflected in the PHP code otherwise, and you can write a comment to that. So I can show you what PHP Documenter creates from that. There's another question coming in here. Sometimes I like to name functions like str name. Yeah, this is you can do that. I would, if it's not members, I would recommend using the lowercase underscore separated form. But again, it's that's just recommendations. most projects do so. I would suggest doing it the same way. If you're talking of member variables, there is perfect. Okay, this is what PHP doc does, and I'll just have some screenshots here that I'll walk you through quickly, so you get an idea what this thing does. And it's much more comfortable to work with the API documentation than to browse through the source code, even with an IDE at hand. So this is an HTML documentation we get generated here, and we have the class documentation, a description of the class. There's some German there. I should do new screenshots once. Variable summary, what variables does this class use? Method summary, what methods are in this class? Then we have details for the methods. What do we pass in square brackets for optional parameters? What does it return? There we have a return tag. And this as access public is used to have a with PHP 4, you had to put a special tag in that would actually document that something is private. With PHP 5, PHP Documenter will derive that from the code. There's a question if that only works for classes. No, again, this also works for procedural code. Not as well, basically, but you still can document your procedures, your functions, and you have to create a document block for every file anyway. Otherwise, PHP Documenter will complain. It makes most sense with objects, though. I think that it's not really a point to completely document the API of a procedural application there. Yeah, there's a comment. It's almost like JavaDoc, correct? That's the idea. There we have. That's very neat, a visualization of the inheritance structure. So you can see this is the class I'm actually looking at, and this is the parent class, and you can just click through that. It also creates an index of elements, which is very useful. And we have a to-do list. You can use the to-do tag throughout your code in the doc block, and this will create a very nice to-do list for your application. I find that very handy. Okay, so that's it basically for today. We are through the first 3 steps of refactoring your PHP code. These are the basics, so to say. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. The slides will be available tomorrow at that URL. Neely will put them up. And please join the second part of this presentation. This is the part where we look at actual code and start refactoring actual code with the steps 4 to 7. This is my email address. Drop me a note if you want. In general, have a nice day and try some refactoring out today. I'm still available for some questions. Just put them in the Q&A. And well, before I forget, thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks for staying through. I hope to see you all again in 2 weeks. Thanks for Zend for hosting that event, and thanks to Neely for setting everything up and bearing with us. Okay, so any questions? Okay. It's too much coming in, so I'll have to scroll. Hold on for a second. I mentioned articles on Xdebug. Just visit devzone.zend.com, and there is sort of a tag cloud. Click on Xdebug. I think they have 4 parts online. It's a 5-part series, and I think the 5th part should be out next week. Everything is scrolling too quickly here, so I'll have to try and catch all the classes. Sorry, all the questions. Sorry if I miss one. I need to enlarge that window, and I can't figure out how to do that. There is a question about ZDE. I'm not sure what ZDE refers to. How do you register for the second part? I think it's the same like you did for the first part, but actually I have no clue. Just go to the Zend webinar website, and I think that that there will be a link where you can sign up. Are you reading all the questions from the participants in the Q&A panel? You're writing into the chat panel, and I'm looking at the chat also and at the Q&A. Thanks for all your wishes you're posting there. We'll be covering more Agile techniques in the future, like more on how important tests are, how they help one be confident in being able to refactor all the time at will. Not really, not in the second presentation, because the reality of PHP applications is that there are no tests. And I do speak about tests in other presentations. I will not focus on that too much in 2 weeks, but just try to focus on how to refactor existing code, be it procedural or object-oriented. Okay. What happens if you beautify custom libraries? Beautifier basically just looks at the syntax. It just looks at where is white space, where is the stuff, and it works on any PHP code. Should be no problem with custom libraries. I would like to see a webinar on refactoring procedural code into OOP. Actually, I've written some articles on that appeared in PHP Architect. And I think you can purchase the old issues as a PDF version. If you want to look at those, that might be a good start. A webinar on refactoring procedural into OOP. I'll have to talk to Zend about that. Basically, it seems to be like a good idea. And then, can you send links to those? Can you please make clear what those refers to? Is that the second part? Okay. So Neely tells me that time's up, and I'm supposed to wave you all goodbye. I hope that you all are going to be back in 2 weeks, and you can ask more questions then. If you have more questions popping up, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you. Which editions of PHP Architect, I'll find out and I'll post that along with the material. So any questions that I couldn't answer now because I just missed them because my thingy was scrolling too fast, I'll get back to you by email. Don't worry. And if I don't, just drop me an email. Well, that's it. I'll call it a day. It's 7 p.m. here. It's already dark, and I think I'm going to retire for today and have a beer. I wish you all a nice day of work, those that still have it in front of them. And the others, have a good night. See you in 2 weeks in the same channel. And maybe there's a chance of seeing you at one of the conferences this year. Bye-bye, everybody.